One of the most glaring failures of the United Nations is the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. Despite the countless calls by the international community since the founding of the United Nations, the will of the majority continues to be negated by the few. They hide their true intentions under the guise of national security and the notion of justice. Wars took place and millions lost their lives have portrayed that the very same actors caught in some of the worst tragedies have chosen to remain oblivious. For there to be lasting peace in the Middle East, the prescribed international consensus in conjunction with international law, United Nations resolutions, and the UN Charter, Israel must do several things. First, it must cease all of its illegal settlement activities. Second, it must withdraw its troops from the occupied Palestinian territory and surrounding Arab states. Third, it must allow Palestinian refugees the right to return to their land and property. Fourth, it must restore the original status of Jerusalem. And last but certainly not least, it must restore its credibility and revert to the negotiating table with Palestine. These are not new preconditions. These are merely a reflection of years of diplomatic work and the consensus reached over decades of negotiations. Israel can no longer be in denial. Israel continues to threaten Palestinian statehood with further annexation of Palestinian land, further denying Palestine any semblance of human security or peace. Malaysia's position on this matter remains clear and consistent. Annexation is unlawful. It violates the Charter of the United Nations, the Geneva Conventions, and relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council. The acquisition of any territory by war or force is inadmissible and illegal. As such, there will never be, nor can there ever be, any legitimacy in Israel's actions against Palestine. Now, together with the rest of the international community, Malaysia will continue to reaffirm its support to the realization of the State of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem at its capital. The only viable way forward is a negotiated two-state solution. In this context, Malaysia supports the call of the international community, including by UN Secretary General, for the Middle East Quartet to find a mutually agreeable path for the parties to re-engage towards a negotiated, peaceful settlement. We continue to call upon the international community to uphold Palestine's legitimate rights to self-determination, which constitute one of the very core principles of the United Nations when it was created 75 years ago. Another glaring example is the plight of the Rohingya, when atrocities were committed en masse against the Rohingya in the state of Rakhine. Thousands fled their homes, fearing for their lives. Many died while crossing oceans and land in search of safety, whilst many others fell victim to opportunistic human trafficking rings, promising the Rohingya a life they could only dream of. Yet they still choose to make that life, threatening decision to leave home out of sheer desperation. The spillover effects of the crisis in the Rakhine state, which includes the mass migrations of people from Myanmar, has significantly impacted not only Malaysia, but also other neighboring countries. Malaysia currently hosts the largest number of Rohingya refugees in Southeast Asia. As a developing nation coping with the cost of managing and providing protections to nearly 180,000 registered refugees and asylum seekers in the country, with 80% of them from Myanmar, our resources are stretched thin. Yet Malaysia is expected to do more to accommodate these incoming refugees. Is that fair? Now, although Malaysia is not a party to the 1951 Refugees Convention and its 1967 Protocol, Malaysia has taken up the social and financial responsibility in providing humanitarian assistance and protection to Rohingya refugees on humanitarian grounds. The time has come for state parties to the Convention to shoulder a proportionate burden and responsibility in addressing the problems by opening the doors for more refugees for resettlement and relocation. Addressing the influx of these refugees into our borders is one side of the story. The bigger question is, how can the international community play a more meaningful role to end the atrocities in the Rakhine State? And these are just two glaring examples why a stronger and better United Nations is necessary. The credibility of United Nations can and must be restored in order to build the future we want, the United Nations we need. This can only be done if we find the moral courage and political will to do what is right.